Now we move back to item number 9, which is Margan Ave Reserve. Thanks, Paul. Sorry about before. It's pretty straightforward. I think we should just take the report as read if there's nothing
I'm happy
else
to move,
you want
Madam
to
Chair,
add.
because on the basis that there's a huge number of people moving into this area and the pedestrian access is not good to the town centre. It's very kind of messy and fragmented, and this will make it a lot easier for people to access the train.
So we'll notify it. You move, Councillor Darby. Oh,
In the absence of our councillor for the
moved,
foe.
seconded. Member Blair.
I just wanted to see if we could, number 21 on page 13, it's just a language change. It may seem insignificant, but if we could just put a full stop after significance, because the and or value to mana whenua is something which could be contested, because all land has value to mana whenua. So if we could just put a full stop there, please.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah. And that should be the kind of how we language it for other reports. Yep, no, point understood.
Yep.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, may I just say that further to that point, it would make, is there someone here that can pass that on? Because of course we're doing the new template for reporting, and there are there are ways for staff to follow to write the report. So could that point, could we ensure?
There are many ears picking that up, and I'm
Chief
just going to
Executive?
trust that that is picked up at whatever level it needs
Ever
to be.
trust.
Simpson.
Maybe.
I
I don't mean that unfairly.
No, mostly my faith is well placed. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And now, item 10. So we've got Liz.
It's a public mirror.
Our public art policy, which is, I have to say, this is actually a really interesting report. I'm just going to ask for one correction before we get into it, and it's entirely my parochial nature. On page 40, we talk about the high proportion of public art in the Henderson-Massey Local Board area reflects the legacy art investment made by the former Waitakere Rangers Local Board. No, Waitakere Rangers, or with Waitakere Council.
City Council.
Because we're very proudly number 2 on the number of arts that we have in our area out west. So we just would like that credit correctly expressed.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Over to you.
Kia ora koutou. For those that don't know me, I'm Liz Civil, the Manager of Community Policy, and with me is Ben Brooks, a member of my team. And thank you, Madam Chair, for that correction. I spotted that myself this morning and went, the perfectionist in me thought, no, that was Waitakere City Council, and absolutely the wonderful work that Waitakere has done, did over many, many years, and the reputation you had for leading fantastic public art. So look, this report presents the findings from a progress review of the public art policy, which was undertaken to assess how Council is tracking against the policy outcomes and measures since the policy was adopted in 2013. So our conclusion is overall Council's making some good progress, and all of the works that have been created in Council's regional public art program since the policy came into effect are in line and consistent with the policy outcomes. There's been a balanced program of investment, recognising both high-profile areas such as the CBD and also investment into areas where there's been less public art. In the order of around 64 new artworks have been created across 17 local board areas, covering a range of types and genres of artwork and by a diverse range of artists. However, the review has also identified some opportunities for improvement, in particular the need to simplify and streamline the policy to make it easier to understand. It is a rather dense read, some complicated terms. We could make that much simpler. And also to increase awareness and visibility of the policy. So while our public art team and our arts and culture services area use this policy every day, parts of the council family are not so familiar with it. And we also need to better align public art activity in some areas to the policy outcomes and processes. And it's, those three ideas are very much connected. And we also need to improve the way we evaluate and monitor the policy. But we are not proposing any significant changes to the policy outcomes or processes. So this report seeks the committee's approval to undertake the improvements outlined in the report and a commitment to report back to you at a later date on our progress against that. And welcome to answer questions and anything, points of clarification you have for us. Thank you.
Fantastic, Liz. So questions on our public art policy. And I just want to acknowledge Councillor Philip Biner, who guided so much of this through as chair of that committee. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Yeah, the public art policy is good, Liz. I have no issues with that or the amendments or the promotion of it. I do have a couple of questions, though, about public art, and I'm sure I might get licensed to ask it. The first is, it's 1 to 5 years after women got the vote, and I'm interested in the lack of visibility of women celebrated through art and women artists. That's my first question. My second one is my usual. It's about making art for children. And this has been years and years of trying to get critters in Auckland CBD. We ended up getting 3 outside the Myers kindergarten, but art for kids brings a parents in and just makes the city more vibrant. And my final one was just about how do you make the CCOs do art, like water care?
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Easy questions, really. Hey.
Look, I might call on my colleague Richard McGuire, who's the head of Arts and Cultural Services, to help me with some of these. I think you've raised some interesting points around the importance of diversity and diverse audiences, and that public art can engage with all of our communities, including children. And it's interesting how that happens, because it's not always just by art that you would say is specifically targeted at them. And in fact, if you look at the cover of this this report, you see kids engaging with an artwork, a very well-known artwork, in an interesting way, and playing underneath it and enjoying it in ways perhaps we didn't anticipate when we created it. But Richard, do you want to respond in terms of the kinds of works that might have been developed with women and female artists?
Sure. I think one of the challenges going forward is actually communicating what we do have in the collection, and we're working at not only trying to share that information across the region, but also to activate the artworks. We're quite good at making stuff and installing it, but what we're not so great at is actually having a life after that opening and activating it, having education programs around it for schools, for communities and like, so they get a real ownership of it. So I think those two things are very much in part of this question. So we do have some suffrage works across the city, and we need to embark on an education program and an awareness program of that, and that is coming up very shortly as part of our wider suffrage celebration. We've also got a new program launching this year, which is temporary art for a 5-year period, and it's going to be responding to the themes of 125 years suffrage. And so this is an opportunity not just to plonk art everywhere, but to build capacity within the art sector, and specifically with young emerging women artists, to give them an opportunity to respond to those themes in a less sort of risky area. It's much smaller scale, and they're distributed across the region. So that's really exciting to come from and to look forward to. And we're even extending that through the project managers, new emerging female project managers as well.
Yeah, and there was a third bit, children's art.
Children's art, we've got a few things in the collection, but again, it's about activating them. We've got something in the pipeline for summer, which is a rainbow machine, which is a joint art piece and education piece. And it's about how rainbows are made, and you engage with the rainbows, and you can have your selfie taken with these rainbows. And what looks like a giant contraption of doom almost, this huge machine, and it's all been geared and designed so kids can actually turn the wheels very easily and align it with the sun, and it's safe. We've done all of that sort of stuff, and it projects a rainbow. So we're going to be launching that in the summer, and that's going to have also an art component, but largely an education component about how refraction works, how gears work, how machines are made, and that wider thing. So we're hoping to bridge that bit of a gap.
Just one supplementary. When you mentioned the suffrage art, you said the word temporary. What does that mean? What is temporary art if it's not plonk art?
It's a low risk investment, so there's a much smaller scale, both financially and materiality. In order to give new emerging artists an opportunity to play, we don't want to give them a huge expensive commission. We want to be really fiscally restrained with the level that they're playing with, and that means we can use people that haven't had a huge amount of experience and actually coach them through the process. So the temporary is 5 years. What that means is at the end of the 5 years, we'll have to make a decision. Do we renew? Do we re-site permanently, all of those things? Or is it a work that actually needs to be rethought and reimagined and allow space for another new artwork?
And Madam Chair, perhaps I can just add, the policy is very clear about public art embracing both temporal work, pop-up work, as well as permanent public art. So obviously the processes that we put in place for things that are going to be permanently in the public realm, the standards are much higher. The things we expect, the level of robustness that an artwork must be able to endure, the rigours of being in the public realm. But we really want to encourage much more activation, artists in public space, activating space, doing pop-up activities that kind of engage Aucklanders as they go about their everyday lives in all sorts of interesting ways. So Richard's team have been doing a lot of work in that area, as has our Auckland Design Office, using artists in public space to create happenings and engagement.
The other question you didn't address was CCOs, and I was trying to imagine water care being arty.
Yes, it's on our horizon. There is real interest from the CCOs. What we haven't had with the policy is the ability to communicate what's in it in an easy to understand way. So part of the review there talks about road shows, actually going and visiting and sitting down with CCOs and saying, hey, look, this is how we create. This is the sort of services we can offer you. These are the sorts of things we require from you, and the different points of engagement or gateways through a project. Often we've been at the very end of a project and we've really struggled to deliver on time and with that parent project. So we want to be at the beginning of the conversation to ensure that all the checks and balances are there and start this conversation. But it's really about getting out and meeting the rest of the council family and communicating what the new revised policy will have.
Thanks, Councillor Casey. Councillor Philippaina.
No, just sweet.
We just name-checked you for the
Yeah,
fantastic
I'm
work
still
getting
here.
us to this
Some
level.
art.
Also. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Thank you for the report. I just had a few questions. The public art policy talks about partnership with mana whenua. Do we have any partnerships with mana whenua on public
Look,
art?
I think there's a whole range of examples across the region where we've been working closely with mana whenua. Just in your own area, Te Oro was an example where we worked closely with the three iwi there to tell their stories through the design and build of Te Oro. So that's an example. Richard may have others he'd like to talk to.
I mean in terms of actual partnerships, not working together, not bringing them on board to design something, but actual partnerships.
A lot of work with water care.
I guess we've often engaged at a project level, and we've identified that at the project level it's often too late and too low level. So we've been leading a piece of work over the last 18 months to actually lift up the engagement, so it's at the work program and deciding on opportunities part of the process. And the aim of that is to identify what are the key spaces spatially, and also the key opportunities for us to do partnerships, not only with mana whenua but with the various sculpture trusts that are around the region. So instead of waiting till we've got a project on the go and we've already sort of conceptualised it and addressing mana whenua there, we're taking it right back to the beginning. So hopefully that will put us in a better space to identify those opportunities. But to date, in terms of joint investment, if you're talking about that, we haven't done a lot of joint investment. We've done quite a lot of engagement and consultation, but that financial thing hasn't really come to light yet in any significant way.
Okay. I just pointed because it's specifically mentioned in the policy, so it would be really good to see some partnerships happen.
And certainly the Arts and Culture team have done a lot of work on building those relationships to identify how they're going to work more closely with mana whenua groups to see where those opportunities for real partnership are.
And lifting it up means that we approach mana whenua and also mana whenua artists to talk about the narratives. So it used to always, the narrative was decided and then we would go to them. So to understand what are the key principles, the kaupapa behind some of the spaces and the way that we work is really valuable. So it's lifting it up to that level.
Thank you. Can I ask another
Yep.
question? I just wanted to know, has affordability ever been a factor in public? I know public art is subjective.
Yeah.
There's no price unless you're an artist and you put in your quote. But yeah, has affordability ever been a factor that anyone considers when we look at public art?
It's never far from anyone in the council's view, I don't think.
It's not mentioned in the policy as an outcome or anything like that.
I think the conversation is more likely to be around value for ratepayers' money, and that's the key thing, is that value statement and judgment. Affordability is part of that, but it's actually, we're often talking significant investments, but we're also expecting whatever it is to last a minimum of 15 years and then beyond. If you look at some of our really key pieces like Windtree that was on the front of that report, people love that. It's a really expensive work. It's made out of marine stainless steel, for the environment and everything. It's been replaced a little bit by at this stage because of the fact that it's valued and cherished and loved. It doesn't come cheap, but the value over the lifespan becomes much more affordable.
I had one more. Yep. Oh, and how are you tracking with providing the expert recommendation on the artistic content of public art programs and projects to local boards?
We visit local boards whenever we've got a work that is in their particular locale. We have to do it for a regulatory viewpoint in terms of getting landowner consent, but obviously in order to get landowner consent passed, we try and engage them with the concepts. Often local boards that will be on a sort of assessment panel or an information panel for works, and they'll feed into it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge the work that you guys do, bringing some real wonderful life to the city in many, many parts. The most recent installation, Catherine Griffiths Lightweight, it's just changed the spatial feel of that street. It's more than just the art and looking at the art. It's actually what the art has contributed to the whole space. It's quite amazing. I've never seen so many selfies taken in that street now with that artwork installed. Great work. People have got sore necks though looking at it.
That's absolutely the intent of public art, to transform public space. So it's great to hear that that's achieving
yes,
that
it's just
that
amazing
outcome.
when you watch people stop looking at the art and start watching the people looking at the art, and you get the change. The lighthouse as well, the Parakowhai work, just remarkable. I have a question about one piece of art which is a very valuable piece of art, and I can't remember the artist, and it's in our own building at the former ASB building at 135 around the back by a British artist.
Richard Deacon.
What is going to happen to that work? I understand that work has inflated in value tremendously because of the popularity of that British artist now. Is it going to stay in situ there, or is it deserving of another place?
Yeah, it was part. It's a Richard Deacon work, and it was part of the floor bonus scheme attached to the asset of that building. But that doesn't mean it's permanently there. We're not actively seeking any other relocations, but from time to time we do look at the positioning of art and are there better places for it as movements change around the city, as hubs and shopping districts change to entertainment districts, etc. So we're always open to that. It's quite a long process to move works such as those. Purely because we would always engage back with the artist about, what was the relationship with the land around it and what it touches and the environment. But we're not working actively on any change to that work.
So in the refurb work, there's quite a lot of money being spent on that building. Is that artwork going to be shown better? Because at the moment, it's a bit of a dead space around there. It's poorly lit. Are you working with that contract to better show that work?
We've had peripheral conversations about the work and its location there. It is interesting to note that it often has felt quite crammed, and when it was originally designed for that space, the veranda was actually sort of another story higher, so it would have been quite a different feel to that. So personally, my own opinion is that it does feel quite crammed under that space. We can certainly look at minor improvements such as lighting, etc. We did just repaint it just before it got all boarded off, so that'll have another effect in terms of its engagement. It will also be interesting to revisit that site and just see what the movements are now with Federal Street in terms of how that's changed, and also the development on the other side of Wellesley and what the movements are pedestrian-wise.
Okay, and final question, Chair. Just at the top of our agenda, page 28, which is page 4 of your public art policy update, you refer to drawing on the expertise of the Advisory Panel for Art in Public Places. I thought we changed that name.
I understand that the name is changing. This report was probably written prior to that decision to change the name.
Oh, okay.
So, so we can update that to reflect the new name.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. And final speaker is Councillor Collins.
Oh, no, I had my name up.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Simpson. I'll just do a time check while Councillor Collins just gets himself ready to speak. We're going to deal with this item, which hopefully is coming to a close. We're then going to deal with our open space item, aiming to complete that by 12:30. We'll then break for lunch from 12:30 to 1, and then we'll come back to talk about the James Wallace Arts Centre issue. So just to give people an idea of the time frame. So working towards a 12:30 break. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few questions. I'm looking at the percentage share of public art types since 2013. I like all of that. Just two things in that. Are we going to put a ceiling on how many sculptures we're going with, or is that that we just keep going with sculptures? And secondly, just wondering at what category does kind of graffiti and bombing fit into?
So sculpture is a broad term, and within sculpture there's a whole variety of things. So it is the kind of common label for most public art, that permanent public art that's in the public realm.
Gotcha.
So I think that it slightly doesn't quite reflect the diversity that's actually within that category. And the graffiti, the bombing, that kind of thing, we see there's more temporal art, so it's within that category of a temporary public art is probably the closest thing, unless you wanted to add anything, Richard, in terms of your...
No, we would certainly agree with that, and there is certainly a place for graph art and the likes, but it needs to reflect the fact that it's often on other people's buildings. They get built out quite quickly, so it doesn't have the same kind of investment that we would have with the rest of the collection.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to pick up on the question that Councillor Casey asked around children, and I really like the example of the rainbow activity or I'm wondering how the children/youth are doing the thinking behind the art in the first place, as opposed to perhaps adults preparing stuff that they can come and engage with.
I think that is probably something that we need to work on more. As I say, the suffrage program is the first time we've dealt with emerging artists, but they're still graduates of art school or similar. So I think we've got to, first of all, have the collection reach the children and actually engage in that space and workshop and build capacity and an understanding of the value of art. In terms of, you'll notice the hesitation in my voice, there is something around about designing art by committee that we're very conscious of trying to protect artists and not have a committee conglomeration. But there are opportunities, and again, it's through that education and outreach project.
Probably just to add to that, there are also opportunities and times when the artist actually engages quite closely with communities and with children. So I think of the Toya example in the Tahu, where actually the artist worked quite closely with school children in the development of that work and the Breath of Life work there. So there are examples where artists will, as part of their practice and working with communities, engage with particular audiences, whether it's children or diverse communities. So that is quite common in art practice. So we know we could have a think about how often that's happening and where the appropriate opportunities for that to happen in the future. Yeah.
Cool. And just finally, Chair, thank you. In the policy, it talks about how we work with, it talks highly around working with the rich Pacific communities. And I look at the diagram on the share of public art works made since 2013, and Pacific Peoples is at 8%, which is below Auckland's representative group, and European UK artists is above 15%, which is way more than their representative group if we want to go on a population base. I'm interested, and I'm really glad to see that there's a higher number of Māori artists that are being worked alongside. I'm interested to see how we get a better representation of Pacific artists, granted this is the Pacific city in the world.
Okay, so the percentages, just to acknowledge the fact that the collection is quite old, so it's cumulatively, we might actually be doing a lot more in that space. We've just done a Fale, for example, on reserve land. But the heritage stuff is very Eurocentric, and we do acknowledge that, and it's one of those things that we actually do need to look at our collection. We've got about 400 works, and what we've not been doing in past decades is actually looking at the lifespan of works and when to retire them. So we do still have a balance of, you know, the 50-plus year works that may be skewing some of this data, but it is our responsibility to respond to the narratives and the themes and the demographics of the community. So we always do look out for those synergies of starting points.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Very good question, that last one. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've got a number, but I'll try and make them brief. The first one, this is a regional public art budget, right? So who determines how that budget is spent?
We have usually about a 3-year pipeline, and then there's concepts and sort of like parking space beyond that. We've got a number of EOI processes that are used site-specific. Often we would look at an opportunity in consultation with mana whenua or a stakeholder group, and they'll say that we need something here. We then develop a bit of a brief around the narratives that are responsible for that site. Then the work program goes through for consideration and endorsement to the advisory panel, and then the annual work program comes here. And when you'll see one of the changes that's been made in the last few years is our work program, when it comes here, is an indicative work program. And that's in reflection of the fact that we were hitting a number of speed bumps around integrating art into parent projects. So we want to do that because it's better bang for your buck, and you want your new buildings and infrastructure to have amazing art in them. But the timelines would change from year to year in terms of those parent projects would get stalled up, and therefore our follow-on projects would get stalled as well. So we've taken a 3-year view, and so we bring the indicative program to the work program in about June or July. And it's indicative for what we're planning to do, but we also bring projects forward and bring projects, delay them.
Okay, thanks. My next question is, when is a piece of art deemed to be regional, and when is a piece of art deemed to be local?
I think that's one of our ongoing questions, because there is no regional place to put art. So it straddles both camps, and one of the things identified in public art policy is that, you know, that demarcation is very confusing for local boards and very confusing for everyone involved. So one of the recommendations in that policy is to go back and really understand and define the two things.
I mean, generally regional public art is seen as something that draws or reaches an audience of significance. So it's often a placeholder or a signposter of something significant in the region. So often you'll see a lot of the regional works in the CBD or in main town centres, where you expect that the audience that's going to engage with them would be of more regional significance than local. And local generally is where it's engaging with a more localised audience. So it might be in a local park, as part of a local community facility. That would generally be what we would consider more at that local end.
I suppose that leads to my next question, if I may, Madam Chair, and that is, you know, if this is a regional budget, everything regional is local. So, you know, but it's not a local budget. So I wonder, in a sort of a governance role or an awareness role, what is the role of the councillors, who obviously represent all the wards, in this? Or is it, you know, has this bypassed them and go to local boards? I understand that in 90% of the cases it might be on you know, there's a park landowner delegation, but it could be a road corridor or whatever. So where does the role of the kind of the ward councillor, for want of a better word, sit in this from a governance perspective?
Yeah, so I think as Richard's outlined, the main decision about the regional program is made by this committee, and it's a bit like you know, the community facility network plan in a way, that the regional governors look at the overall program and the budget allocation, and then specifically as we get into delivering works in a location, key stakeholders within that area will have input to that. But ultimately, councillors, you know, we take advice from experts in the area of public art, so we have an advisory panel for a reason, so that we're trying to avoid public art by committee. So there's decisions at the what actually the work looks like, and all of those kinds of decisions. We take advice from appropriate experts. But
I get that. My point was really around when something happens in a ward, it should potentially be local board and the councillor collectively. That was my point. And the last one is, why do you need a road show to socialise the streamlined policy? And will the budget for that come out of the regional public art budget?
No, the regional public art budget that we talk about, the 2.1 million is CapEx. The roadshow will be us as part of our normal relationship building that we have to do with council family. There's a lot of wins to it for us, so the investment in terms of our time and our effort is hopefully going to pay off. Often there are opportunities within other people's budgets and other people's infrastructure that we want to leverage, and the only thing stopping them is they don't know how to engage. Or they engage an artist directly and it sort of gets to a certain point and then they hit speed wobbles and come to us, which is quite time consuming, and it's not in our work program. So what we want to have is a long-term view of the things coming up towards us, and it'll be more efficient if we actually reach out and really get the CCOs and the wider council family understanding our policy and using it to its best effect.
Sorry, just one more. We've had a number of art installed in the Ōrākei ward that have come from patrons, because we seem to have a number of art patrons within our boundaries. What can we do more to encourage that allows the rates-funded public art budget to be boosted a little bit? And would your roadshow assist that in some way?
I think what will assist is our comm strategy. So we're working on a number of easier to use sort of companion pieces to this. We've got a murals toolkit that's just been redone that's much easier to use. We've got a temporary public art one being developed at the moment for local boards, community and officers to use as well. But one of them is and it's captured in the master policy there, which is the gifting policy. Now, a lot of people come to us with gifts and we put them through the process and then we say, thanks, but actually we don't want it because it doesn't meet this requirement, or it's not going to be robust in this public space, or it's going to break and need to be put on an island and in the middle of stone fields or the like. So what we want to do is front-end it again, where we set up the expectations of how the policy works to those people who are likely to gift, and say to the Sculpture Trust, there's about 6 sculpture trusts around the place, when you commission art with the intention of giving it to council, these are the things you need to consider, and actually we'll be part of that selection process. We'll come and talk to you, and that way it's got a much higher chance of getting through. So it's a way of keeping them safe, because it's no secret that there have been some sculpture trusts that have tried to engage with council to gift them something, but they've done it at the very end of the process, and when they've got a no, they've been really disappointed, and a lot of investment. So we want to get at the front of the conversation.
I agree with that. Thank you.
I think, councillor, the critical thing too is us as a council expressing out to our art patrons out there and our likely supporters that we wholeheartedly endorse, support and value public art. And to be honest, we've given some pretty mixed messages about that, and I'm thinking particularly of the extraordinary Barfoot family who paid pretty much entirely for the lighthouse, were not treated well. So if we want more donations and more patrons to support us, we need to support our public arts team wholeheartedly, and we need to support the provision of art out there in our beautiful city wholeheartedly. And I think that will go a long way to making us more successful. Final word to Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And as an aside, on the timeline that you gave us for the committee this afternoon, I do know that the Hauraki Golf Forum does require the governing body, they've reconvened in the town hall so that we can actually call in briefly. They started at 12, so some of us will probably have to slip out for a short time. But to Liz and Richard and Ben, I mean, just grateful thanks. We don't see you as often these days because of the governance structure that we're working to. And to echo the comments made by Councillor Darby, as, mind you, I'm someone who's never taken a selfie, so I wouldn't really know how you go about taking a selfie. But no, however, can I just say that for me, public art just helps people pause, take stock, and fall in love with their city. And I would go completely insane on this reception lounge of the town hall if I didn't have that Peter Siddell that I just absolutely adore, that keeps me grounded when I'm sitting here. So good on you for what you're doing. I want to follow on from Desley, really, and it's just coming back to that accountability, governance, and really, I think the direction that the chair was taking in terms of encouraging philanthropy, and I do get your point that it has to start at the right end of the cycle. Do you feel you're getting, in a governance sense, sufficient oversight from us to enable you to feel supported? Because it's always going to be vexed on this regional, local sort of thing. Are you feeling comfortable with the governance you are receiving from us, notwithstanding the advisory panel and everything else that we do to make the process robust? What more can we do to assist you?
It's interesting, we had a couple of engagements with councillors over the last couple of weeks, and a couple have asked to come and have a look at the art that we're creating, because it is a difficult thing to circulate the iterative nature of art, because just like the Lighthouse, we're not quite sure at a certain point in time what it's going to look like. And the staff really appreciate that, but also it helps get a really good understanding of what we are working on. So if there are any projects that you identify in the work program in terms of that 3-year pipeline, significant investment in your ward areas, we're most welcome, to come through and have a look at the models, the maquettes that are made, and the product development, and really understand the process, because I think a lot of people do just think it's the actual thing that you end up building. Of course, it has many iterative builds and product testing, and there's some really fascinating stories and partnerships that are going on in that space. So I guess if anyone would like to know more, our door's open, and we're happy to show our toys to other people.
And if I can perhaps just add to that, I think the leadership role that the governors play in, one, by having a policy, and two, by making explicit investment into public art is a huge thing that you do to signal the importance of this to a city, to creating a world-class city. And I guess, public art is, as you know, and you've experienced, at times challenging and raises controversy. And it's that kind of permission to feel the fear and do it anyway, because ultimately it leads to the kind of experiences that Councillor Darby was talking about, transforming public spaces, people's interaction with it, people's joy as they go about their city. Even if they think, what the heck is that thing? It kind of creates conversation pieces. So backing this kind of policy and supporting investment into public art, and huge opportunities like the City Rail Loop, where something really transformational can happen with the integration of art into those major public infrastructure projects. That really is where we'll get some massive transformational things happening.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations.
I'll second.
And Councillor Darby will second. Lovely. And final comment, final comment, Councillor Collins.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and sorry, I should have commented after the questions. I just wanted to firstly note how jealous I was when I read the report and I saw how much was happening out west, what happened out west, and you prefaced the discussion with those comments, but I was really intrigued by it, because I think it's really awesome. I think having public art available in spaces does allow people the opportunity to stop, take stock, have a look, maybe listen, and I think that's really great, and I think out south that would be really cool as well. I just wanted to invite a slightly wider discussion in your thinking as you're undertaking this project. And I've been thinking a lot about museums. Now, I know this isn't museums, but we know that the Volkischer time during, which was a definition used by the Germans and how they displayed art in museums, was about how certain groups were privileged around what was seen as art. And you've already noted the comment around some of the collection as Eurocentric. And I'm really keen to see how we broaden our definition of art, what's on public display, because I think when you've got a city as ethnically diverse as Auckland is, which is wonderful, I think we've got to really start to grapple with what public art is and what it means for some, and whether it's temporary or whether it's fixed, and how we move in between all of that. And so I would just welcome that, because I think what we've seen over the years is I go out south and, you know, we set up these little things, and it's great because the residents stop, even our young people stop. And so the reason I was kind of asking questions about how our children are involved is because I think that gets them really ingrained and feeling like they belong to this community too, because they see stuff that they've done. And yeah, we're always going to have those cool artists as well. Their works are awesome to look at too, but I think we can move quite generously between the two and get a really neat balance. So I just wanted to make the comment, because I think we're on a really good path. I'm excited that we're going to get some of these really good outcomes. I'm hopeful that we'll see a good array of participants in the artistic work we're collaborating with, but I'd really love to see our city start to open up its discussion on how we define what public art is. So thank you very much.
Perfect place to end that discussion. Yeah, public art, exactly what it is, not art that you have to pay money to go and look at. It's for everybody, and that's the joy of it. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And can we just echo our support and aroha to the awesome community arts team. You are